Well, hello there. My name is Roy Cohen, and I'll be hosting this week's Community Forum show. And today's show is a special show in that we have Congressman Stephen Lynch with us, and we're going to be discussing a wide variety of subjects, a little bit from the past and more from the future. But before we get started with the interview, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Congressman. He was first sworn into the United States Congress in October 2001, following the sudden passing of legendary Congressman John Moakley. And I remember that. That was quite a time there. The son of Francis Lynch, an iron worker, and Ann Lynch, a postal clerk, Congressman Lynch was born and raised in public housing projects of South Boston. Upon graduation from South Boston High School in 1973, Congressman Lynch entered the Iron Workers Apprenticeship Program and later joined his father as a member of Boston Iron Workers Local 7. He worked as a structural iron worker for 18 years and was eventually elected to serve as president of the Iron Workers Union, the youngest president in the history of the 2,000-member union. Congressman Lynch continued his education at Wentworth Institute of Technology on nights and weekends, earning his bachelor's degree in construction management. He later received a law degree from Boston College Law School and was admitted to both the Massachusetts and New Hampshire bar, and continued his advocacy for working people as a labor and employment attorney. In 1994, Congressman Lynch was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and after just 14 months in office, he was elected to the Massachusetts State Senate in a special election. In the Senate, he served as the chair of the Joint Committee on Commerce and Labor. In 1999, he earned a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. And during his career as an iron worker, Congressman Lynch worked at the General Motors plant in Framingham, Massachusetts, the General Dynamics shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts, and the United States Steel plant in Gary, Indiana, all of which were either shut down or severely curtailed due to unfair foreign trade practices. Congressman Lynch's firsthand experience in seeing the effects of plant closings on American workers and on local communities has led him to focus on efforts to improve U.S. trade policy and protect American jobs. In the 114th Congress, Congressman Lynch is a member of the Financial Services Committee and the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, where he serves as ranking member on the Subcommittee on National Security. Lynch is also a member of the Subcommittee on Government Operations. Congressman Lynch is a co-founder of the Congressional Labor and Working Families Caucus, which was formed to protect workers' rights and educate members of Congress on issues that impact American families. Lynch continues to serve as co-chair of the Task Force on Anti-Terrorism and Proliferation Financing, a bipartisan congressional panel that monitors the status of national and international efforts to track and stop the flow of funds to terrorist groups and works to strengthen our national anti-terrorism finance strategy. He and his wife, Margaret, continue to live in their lifelong hometown of South Boston, where they are raising their daughters, Victoria and niece, Crystal. Congressman, a long introduction.
It was a long introduction. I think I'm about done now.
But a heck of a resume, for sure.
Oh, thank you, Roy. Thank you.
It's nice to know that there's a man in government with a great background. He, as opposed to what you're listening to with with the presidential race that's going on, where some people do not have any political background whatsoever, and well, we'll see how that goes, and I'm not going to get into that. We're not going to get into presidential politics today. Maybe at another time. I'm not going to pin you down on that. Can we start off by talking about what's coming up?
Sure. Congress is, and first of all, thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for coming.
Good to be back in Stoughton. As you know, Congress is on the August recess. Since John Adams was president, they've had a month off during August for members to go back and spend time in their district. And so we'll be back in Washington on September 8th for the first days of the session. I think the first two big issues that are looming are, one, the Iran agreement, and secondly, the transportation bill, which was kicked down the road a little. They kicked the can down the road a little bit, but it's due to be addressed by the end of September, early October. So we still don't have a full-fledged highway bill. Haven't had one in a number of years. So those two issues would probably be first on the agenda as we reconvene on September 8th.
On the Iran information, I'd like to see if we can hold that off to the last 15
Sure,
minutes.
sure, yeah.
I have lots of questions on that one. But on the highway bill, why is there hesitation to fund it? I mean, they're talking about bridges that are falling apart. Half the bridges in the country are falling apart. The roads are full of potholes. There's sinkholes happening. All the bad things. And why?
Well, okay, here's the problem. The Highway Trust Fund is funded by the gas tax, and a good story is that we are using much more fuel efficient automobiles. People are driving less, using rapid transit, but one of the negative byproducts of that activity is that less and less money goes into the people are driving less, getting greater fuel efficiency in their cars, less money going into the tax into the Highway Trust Fund by way of taxes. So if we were smart, we would have when gas went to $2 a gallon, and we may be back there at some point, we should have taken a few cents and increased the gas tax, and that would have given us money to repair our bridges, build our roads, engage in major highway projects. We haven't done that. And
why the hesitation in raising the gas tax?
The Republican leadership is dead set against raising taxes. Most of the members of the House and Senate on the Republican side have taken a pledge not to raise taxes, even though this is the mechanism by which we repair roads and bridges. So they've decided not to take that step, which I think is necessary at some point. Remember, we were paying $4 a gallon for gas, and it went down to $2. If we had taken a few cents, instead of dropping the gas from $4 to $2, how about $2.03, and taken 3 cents and put that to the gas tax, we would have been able to do all this work that needs to be done. So right now there's resistance both in the House and the Senate among the Republican Party to raise those taxes, to increase the gas tax and refund, basically revitalize that Highway Trust Fund. So that's why we don't have the money. And the sad part is this is work that's going to have to be done at some point. Otherwise, you're going to have bridges collapsing and those problems you talked about with huge potholes and sinkholes, and those will develop into more costly projects where the underpinnings of the roadway and the bridges will also deteriorate, and it'll cost you much more money down the line than it would if you'd done it in a timely fashion. So
how will they fund it?
I think we're going to have to at some point raise the gas tax.
Yeah, but you got a Republican majority that won't do it. They consider that taxes.
They won't. Well, they are talking about a tax reform bill, which might allow us to reconfigure the tax load so that we address the highway funding piece. So, but it's presidential politics right now, and somewhat the silly season. Yeah. So we're not talking about those practical necessities. They refuse to embrace, the realistic part of this, which is we're going to have to figure out a way to repair roads and bridges, and that ties into our wider economy. That has been one of the strengths in the United States, is that we've had a great infrastructure system that allows private business to operate and conduct commerce. Well, that is threatened right now, and my fear is that we're going to have some major bridge collapses in the United States. I'm a former iron worker for 18 years. That's what I did. I built bridges, and an important part of that, the longevity of those bridges, is making sure that they're maintained properly. We're not doing that right now. So I'm worried that we're going to have a couple of major bridge collapses around the country, and then Congress will say, "Oh, we never saw that coming," which is not true.
Crisis management.
Yeah, that's right.
Can't they rename the gas tax something else so they won't be raising taxes? Call it something else?
Well, yeah, they probably could, but I don't think they've thought of that yet. But
well, you can go back
the bottom line is sometimes you just have to do things like that. That's the tough, to govern, you've got to make some choices, and that's one of the choices we have. So we're going to have to. I mean, by all means, you have to make sure that your money is spent wisely and properly, and that you're not building bridges to nowhere, as been done in the past.
But there is Route 95, a road to nowhere.
Yeah, well, you do need to have monitoring to make sure the money is spent properly and efficiently. But especially more recently, we've seen highway dollars spent very, very efficiently. We've actually had a reduction in the cost per mile of what it takes to repair, because for the most part around the country, those road contractors have sharpened their pencil in order to be competitive to get the available dollars. So we have seen some improvements along those lines.
My sister has the right idea. Living out in California, when she comes up to an intersection and it happens to be like the 4 or the 105 is over there, she doesn't stop at the light under the bridge. I think for different reasons. I think for possibility of an earthquake or something. But,
I see.
They could collapse. They have out there in the past.
Yeah.
I think you ought to go back and tell them we'll call it something else, but let's raise it 5 cents. I mean, our gas in Brockton is down to $1.99 a gallon. I'll tell you where it is after the show is over.
Okay, yeah, because I'm paying $2.19, so that'll be a good deal.
Well, that's an amazing thing in itself, and put a few more cents on there. Let's get the thing funded.
Right. Absolutely.
That's what I would do. You're a ranking member of the National Security Subcommittee. What do you do on that? What does that committee do, and what are your priorities?
Well, generally what we look at is areas that we're having major problems in. So I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, a lot of time in Iraq, recently up on the Syrian border in Turkey, working with our intelligence folks and special ops teams that are in those countries, and making sure they have what they need to do their jobs, and in terms of going after different groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIL. So we've got some major problems, obviously in western Iraq and on the Syrian border with ISIL. A lot of my time is spent on issues dealing directly with Syria, not only within Syria and Iraq, but also the overflow that's happened in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Turkey. So we've got
that's on the news very much these days.
Right,
thousands of people trying to get away from that area.
Right, and we've got a partnership with the Turkish government at a number of the refugee camps along the Turkish-Syrian border. We've been in there to talk to some of the refugees and also to try to get a better handle on how we might respond with the cooperation of the Turkish government. Recently, they've sort of turned the page a little bit. They're much more cooperative. We had a very difficult time early on in getting Recep Erdogan, the former prime minister and now president, to really take concerted action on the border there. And but recently, they've allowed us to use Incirlik Air Base, and they've taken a more progressive and active role in fighting with ISIS. So that's an improvement. But it's still, we've had 200,000 casualties from the Syrian population over the past few years. So that's still a major problem. But really, we need a coalition response. I don't think that putting, as some have argued, putting American boots on the ground will help the situation in the near term.
Why?
Well, we spent $25 billion training Iraqis, training Iraqi Army, Border Patrol, and police. We trained 938,000 Iraqis between 2003 to 2012. In spite of all that, and we lost 4,000 good Americans on the ground. After all that was said and done, a relatively small group of about 25,000 extremists, ISIL, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, rolled up most of those military units, took over huge swaths of territory. So all of our training and equipping went for naught. A lot of our weapons are now in the hands of ISIL. So the training and the equipping part that they want to continue didn't work over a 10-year period when we spent $25 billion and trained 938,000 Iraqis. So doing the same thing again, putting U.S. boots on the ground, trying to train these Iraqis to take over their responsibility for their own country, didn't work the last time we tried it. So I think it would be foolhardy to repeat that all over again. Unless we're going to stay there forever and be their police department and be their government, which I would recommend against strongly. They need to take responsibility for their own country.
Why not take these boots on the ground, as you put it, and have them go after the ISIS themselves? Why train these people that are going to wind up running away?
At some point we have to
do it ourselves.
At some point we have to leave, though.
Well,
if we want to do that, we ought to do that in Somalia. We ought to do that in Afghanistan. We ought to do that in Pakistan. We ought to do that in Syria. I mean, if you want to do that, if you think that's the way the United States should operate, and by the way, we're going to need a draft because we've got these young kids that are doing 5, 6, 7 tours of duty because they're volunteer.
Yeah.
And so no, I think that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy for the United States to go around the world and fight other countries' wars.
ISIS started off small.
Yeah.
We left Afghanistan, then ISIS started to grow.
No, actually, ISIL came out of the Iraq war when Paul Bremer refused to allow any Baathists from the Saddam Hussein regime to be part of the government. All of those Baathist officers, generals, colonels formed this group. That's who the leadership, al-Baghdadi, is a former Baathist, and he has surrounded himself with very capable warfighters and generals that were from the former Baathist regime, largely supported by Sunnis in western Iraq and also eastern Syria. So that's the genesis of ISIL. But they also received the support of the population because of Nur al-Maliki, the Shia prime minister of Iraq, basically allowed Shia militias to wage war against the Sunni tribes in Anbar province. So while we wanted to unite Iraq, the Kurds, the Sunni, and the Shia, Nur al-Maliki, a Shia prime minister, wanted to turn that into a Shia-dominated country and did not have the same national goals that we had for Iraq, meaning a working democracy. So, look, I think it is a terrible, terrible idea for us to go in and to try to take over the responsibilities that Iraqis have for their own country.
But they're not doing it themselves. They're all fighting each other.
Well, right. There's a huge rift between the Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds. But putting U.S. boots on the ground is not going to help that situation. We did that for 10 years. We did that for 10 years. What's different this time that we're going in there? We're going to do the same thing over again every few years, go in. Think about it, 4,000 Americans went in there and tried to give these people a chance at democracy. They had that opportunity, but they did not grasp it. They wanted something different than we wanted for Iraq. So, no, I think it's an extremely, well, knowing what we know now, I could not support sending United States soldiers in there to do what Iraqi soldiers who have been trained, who have been equipped, what's the matter with them? What, they asked me this in a refugee camp in Syria, over the border in Turkey. They said, why doesn't the United States go in and fight ISIL directly? And I said, well, why is it that we should send our sons and daughters in here to do the job that your kids should be doing? They said, you can do it faster. You could do this in a matter of weeks. That's what they said. And then at the end of that, when we withdraw, what's going to happen then? It's going to go right back into the same cycle.
Like they already has.
They need to face up to their responsibilities. The rule of law. Let's start with that. Getting rid of corruption. Treating people with basic dignities. Giving women the rights they should have as equal citizens rather than being treated as personal property. Those are basic things that educating your children.
That's another subject I want to get into.
You know, that giving kids an opportunity. One of the greatest things I think we've done in Afghanistan that hasn't been talked about is that because the literacy rate was so low in Afghanistan, we had to begin a program in training their police and their border patrol and their army. They couldn't even read the instructions on weapons, and we couldn't teach them. So we started a program with the Italians, the Germans, the French, and the Brits of teaching Afghans how to read, just to the 3rd grade, just the basics that they needed for training. And that program, and we trained over 250,000 Afghans, including women. We had a requirement that women had to be part of the police and part of the Border Patrol and part of the Army. That program will probably have more impact than the tens of billions of dollars that we spent on military initiatives. Just teaching those people how to read. First of all, they all wanted to go on to 4th grade. And the women went back to their homes and taught their children. And that, if we look back 20 years from now, I think that'll be the biggest difference we made in Afghanistan in teaching people how to read, not the military expenditures that were put forward to defeat the Taliban.
Do you think, in looking back, that we should have left Saddam Hussein alone?
No. Look, Saddam Hussein, he had a track record. He gassed his own people, the Kurds.
He was bad.
He was. He fought a 10-year war with Iran. He invaded Kuwait. He fired Scud missiles into the civilian population centers in Israel. He had attacked everybody on his border except for Syria, that he had somewhat of a partnership with. So eventually we would have had to go in and take him out. And I'm not sorry that Saddam's gone. I think that there was at least the opportunity for positive change. The problem is that the same Sunni versus Shia versus Kurdish narrative lives on, and we were not able to overcome that. That was a priority for Nur al-Maliki, and bringing Iraq together as a nation was not a major priority for them. But eventually we had to hand it off. They refused to sign a status of forces agreement where we could remain in that country and not have our soldiers subject to tribal law. We couldn't allow them to remain. So, we had to hand it back to the Iraqis, and they've pretty much made a mess of it.
Unbelievable. I wish people would learn to live with each other. Just they couldn't put a coalition government together like they have in other countries. Bring all the factions together and.
Well, there's an election process there. There is a power sharing agreement in Iraq, but the dominant population is the Shia, and their leadership, at least their previous leadership, Abadi is much better. The current prime minister is much better, but the damage has been done. There's been a lot of sectarian violence committed by the Shia against the Sunni, and that's why the Sunni are sort of sitting on their hands and not buying into this idea of attacking ISIL. ISIL's got the support of the Sunni population in Anbar province. That's why they've been able to remain in Ramadi and Fallujah and in other areas and in Mosul in western Iraq.
With their track record, I'm surprised they have support any place.
With ISIL?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's cutting off heads and all the stuff that they do.
Well, much of it's fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, much of it's fear. But you need a buy-in support of the population for the government, and we certainly don't have that because Nur al-Maliki gave a lot of power to Shia militants and militias in those areas, and those have been accused of fairly horrific crimes as well against the Sunni population.
If you were living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, what would you do different?
I think the president's got the right idea. He's trying to force the Iraqis, the Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds to come together and form a coalition. They've certainly look, we trained 938,000 Iraqis how to fight. We equipped them. They oppose about 35,000 ISIL members. They should be able to take care of their own business.
Are the Iraqis with the latest equipment, the Humvees and all the equipment that you need to fight a battle? Or is the ISIS the only ones that has? Because
they're claiming that, the Iraqis are claiming that many of these battalions are not battle ready and they need more training and more equipment. Some, at least in Ramadi, there wasn't a battle. The Iraqi forces there withdrew. They weren't driven out of Ramadi. They drove out of Ramadi. So I had a meeting with Prime Minister Abadi, and he said we have a morale problem. We have a willingness to fight problem. So, and to be honest with you, in meeting with some of the Iraqis, they fully expect the United States to come in and do their fighting for them. Well, it shouldn't happen. I hope it doesn't happen. I'll vote against it, but they fully expect the United States to come in and fight their battles for them. They're pretty smart, I think.
Yeah.
If we're stupid enough to do that, they're pretty smart. If they think that America is going to put their sons and daughters on the ground, they're pretty smart to do that. And there are enough people in Congress, I think, to give that idea some currency. That's the shame of it. That there are people in Congress who would, after we know what we know already from our own experience of being in there for a dozen years, there are some people in Congress just stupid enough to actually vote to put our sons and daughters on the ground again in that country. And part of my job is to make sure that never happens.
Good.
Yeah.
This we're using jets to bomb sites, using drones to bomb sites. It seems to me that just sending a bomb is different than what we used to do, like in Korea or Vietnam. When they put down a bomb, it was like carpet bombing or something like that. Wouldn't that be more effective than just going after a singular target?
Well, the problem is that the collateral damage, the damage to the civilian population is massive. And so, one of the basic rules of counterinsurgency is, you don't want your military action to create more insurgents. So if we did so-called carpet bombing, we would kill a lot of the innocent civilian population that we need to support the newer government. One good example where the drone strikes and airstrikes have worked is in up around the Mosul Dam. We had Kurdish ground forces working in cooperation with U.S. airstrikes and Jordanian and British airstrikes, and in combination with the Allied coalition airstrikes and the Kurdish ground forces, they were able to take back a huge swath of territory, including the Mosul Dam, including Sinjar Mountain, that whole area where the Yazidis were trapped. So we have had examples of success where the combination of air power and ground forces. However, we haven't had that type of success with Sunni forces. With Shia forces dealing with Anbar province, such as Ramadi and in Fallujah, areas that now are controlled by ISIL. So it may speak to the weakness of the ground forces there, or indeed their willingness to fight.
We were lucky around that Mosul Dam area that they didn't destroy the place before they left.
Yeah, we've got some.
That would have been bad.
Well, there's an existing problem with the dam structurally that we're very, very concerned about in northern Iraq. There had been it holds back billions of gallons of water there and allows irrigation and energy generation, but there's been an undermining of the dam structure there, and there is a concern of having a massive failure.
The undermining is natural, or
well, it was poorly constructed to begin with.
Okay.
The dam was, and then they built a bigger dam on top of that. But there's been an ongoing dam reconstruction project being done below ground. But with this conflict going on, that reinforcement and regrouting is not happening. So we're very, very concerned about a dam collapse in that region.
Are we doing anything to help repair it?
It's under the, we've offered advisors. The Iraqi government was for a long period of time fully engaged in that regrouting and repair, but it has stopped, as I said. So they know the danger, they're just not addressing it, and I'm afraid that that at some point we're going to have a major dam collapse there.
And what happens then?
Well, there are a number of major cities and villages that lie in the path of that dam. It would be a huge disaster. There's also concern that ISIL, in recognizing the weakness that's there, might capitalize and actually try to take that dam out, which would be horrendous.
In April, you were you had conducted a terror financing task force hearing. How did that go?
Well, what we're trying to do,
the process.
Yeah, what we're trying to do, how that works is, I've gone and met with the central banks for Afghanistan and Morocco, Iraq, Tunisia, a number of countries that have been identified as being sources of terrorist financing. And in places like, for instance, Jordan, they've been very, very cooperative and adopted laws that we and the wider international banking community believe is necessary to shut off the legitimate banking system from these terrorists. So King Abdullah and their finance minister adopted laws that will help us to squeeze out the terrorists from the financial system. A lot of these countries have joined the Egmont Group and FATF. It's an anti-terrorist coalition within the banking community, and I think there are 192 countries that have joined so far, with varying success. So the idea of the anti-terrorist financing task force is to make sure that the countries adopt these standards that shut out the terrorists. A lot of it is know your customer, trying to make sure that if there are suspicious transactions, that the banks file a report to local authorities and let them know that there are some suspicious transactions or cash transaction reports, which are typical in that area. So
where are they getting the money?
It's from a variety of
oil wells.
Well, there are a group of funders in the Gulf states. Some believe they are very rich Saudis. Some from Qatar and from Dubai who are extremists in some cases, pro-Sunni, some cases pro-Shia, but they're funding those groups like Al-Nusra Front and Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, and so they're funding them out of petrol resources, oil resources, but also we've seen operations where they've been using car sales. We've seen one network that was actually selling cars purchased in the United States to West Africa. And there was a markup there, and the proceeds were going to militant terrorist groups. So we've seen examples of groups selling CDs outside sporting events here in the United States, where the money was gathered, collected, and then it found its way towards the coffers of some of these terrorist groups. So there are all sorts of larger and smaller efforts as well. Now in the ISIL-controlled territories, there's actually a tax. So they actually tax people who live within their jurisdiction, and obviously that goes to fund ISIL, which is a terrorist regime.
Let's change topics.
Sure.
Something a little bit more pleasant.
All right.
Constituent services. I want to go visit the White House. How do I do that?
So you can call our office in Boston, and Megan Hollingshead is actually the person in that office, in my office. She's at 617-428-2000. And if you're going, people should realize if you want a tour of the White House, because of the security issues at the White House, there's a whole vetting process. There's a background check and all of that.
Right.
But generally, if we have 60 to 90 days, we can help people who have as long as they have nothing in their background, obviously. But we can help them get a tour of the White House with enough advance notice. There's probably 30 to 60 days shorter notice if people want to do a tour of the Capitol. We can help them with that, or negotiate the Capitol grounds. There's a great new visitor center that was constructed. There are a number of new monuments that are that a lot of people haven't seen yet in the Capitol area. So we can help them with that.
Is the Washington Monument all repaired?
It was repaired. Then we had that small shake, and now we've got. I think the staging is down now. But I'm not sure if tours have. Yeah, I think tours have restarted.
Okay, some of the things that people should get in touch with your office. Veterans, if they have problems, they should get in touch with you. The Washington, D.C. visitors that we just mentioned, planning a trip to Washington, you can request a tour, find useful tourism information. The art competition?
Yeah, we have an art competition. Some of the usual requests we get, anybody having a problem with Social Security, that's a federal agency, so we have a good relationship with Social Security on benefits and disability and eligibility. Medicare and Medicaid, that can be very difficult and complicated, so we have people on staff that can usually help guide people. If people, we get a lot of last-minute calls from people who are getting married and about to go on their honeymoon, but they don't have a passport. So we get a lot of those. It's usually the wedding's on Friday, and they want the passport by Monday. Don't wait that long, but in some cases we're able to do that.
Well, that's a miracle.
And now there are countries, before you didn't need a passport to go to Canada.
Now you do.
And now you do. So people forget that, and usually at the last minute they realize. It's usually the wife that has the passport and the husband does not. So I just want to go on record on that. As you said, veterans issues. We have 3 great VA hospitals in our district: Brockton, West Roxbury, and Jamaica Plain. So anybody who has a problem with veterans issues or veterans benefits, we help them on that. Applications to our military academies.
Right.
And I do want to give so if your son or daughter has an interest in attending, West Point or the Coast Guard Academy or Annapolis or the Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs, Colorado, obviously in their sophomore year they should be thinking about it. Usually in the junior year, we have an active application process. We do Academy Day down in East Middle School in Braintree, where we bring in some of our previous cadets and midshipmen, and they speak, and we bring in all the armed services in there to explain to the families. It's not just for the students, it's for the families to come in and basically get a better understanding of what that involves. But recently we had, I just want to give a shout out to a couple of Stoughton residents whose families have been very much involved in that. Michaela Sakich, she was an appointee of mine to the United States Naval Academy class of 2017. She's a graduate of Cardinal Spellman High School. Her mom, Linda McNally, and Darrell Sakich at 72 Bassick Circle here in Stoughton. And we keep track of our appointees. She's doing very well down at the U.S. Naval Academy. As I said, she'll graduate in 2017. And Jeff Johnston just graduated recently from West Point, another appointee of mine. Obviously, you have to be appointed by the congressman in the district. And he's a Stoughton High School graduate. Also, I think he spent a year at Norwich. But he's the son of Ken and Sherry Ann Johnston, 18, my writing, Erica Drive, I'm sorry.
Erica, yeah.
So the great thing about Jeff Johnston, he finished add-on near the top of his class at West Point. He was battalion commander, which is given to the highest performer in the class, and also at the end of graduation, based on your ranking at West Point, you choose the discipline that you would like to pursue. And so because he finished so high in his class, he's been accepted to flight school in Pensacola, Florida. So congratulations to him, and a great credit to the community of Stoughton to have young people like that. It's extremely competitive, and we're just very thankful that they have this, desire to serve their country.
That's nice. Couple of very brief comments. If they want to buy a flag, or if they want a flag that was flown over the Capitol, what do they have to do? They just get in touch with you and request it?
Yeah. I think the easiest for people in this area, the easiest thing is probably either probably to call the Boston office. That would probably be the easiest. And if and we can always have the flags sent to the Brockton office if it's easy to pick up there, obviously.
Okay, we have some contact information on the screen now. If you want to reach the Boston office, you dial 617-428-2000, located at 1 Harbor Street, Suite 304 in Boston. There's a Brockton office, 508-586-5555. It's at 155 West Elm Street in Brockton. And Quincy office, 617-657-6305. It's at 1245 Hancock Street, Suite 16 in Quincy. Do we have some slides? I'm not sure about that. Okay, internships, a very brief, because I've got something I want to get into, but internships, information on the internship opportunities.
Right. We generally limit that to college students. There have been rare exceptions when high school seniors have participated if they have a certain area of study that they're pursuing. But generally for college students, and some of our students here obviously attend school down in the DC area. Some go to UVA, University of Virginia, or Catholic University, or Washington. I'm blanking on Georgetown. We get a lot of kids from there. GW, George Washington University, right, there as well. So, but also during the summer months, if students come down, they can also participate in an internship. We try to expose the students to areas that we deal with on a regular basis. Those issues that I just talked about. Some of them end up giving these tours that we offer to our local constituents. But also we if they're interested in environmental law, we try to make sure we can expose them to some of the activities down in Washington that focus on that, or financial services, or some of them want to get into public service themselves. So we interface with the State Department quite a bit.
Good.
So we try to give them a sense of what's involved. Dealing with legislation in certain areas. So we try to give them a well-rounded exposure to what's going on in Washington.
Okay. Next to the last subject, hopefully we can fit them both in. Otherwise, we're going to have to get you back. Iran.
Yeah.
We've all heard of Iran.
Yeah.
There's a deal going on. And I think that any attempt to override is going to fail.
I think that's probably right. Yeah.
You're quoted back in July, the nuclear agreement with Iran presents us with an opportunity as well as a risk. It clearly states in its preamble and general provisions that Iran it reaffirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. If it were that simple, the agreement also affirms Iran's right to develop a peaceful nuclear program for energy purposes just like any other nation. Therein lies the problem. Iran is not like any other nation. It's a supporter of terrorism. Its leaders have steadfastly denied the Holocaust and denounced Israel's right to exist. Death to America remains a popular theme in Tehran. We can't trust Iran's leaders, so we have sought to contain them. You feel that?
Oh yeah.
Do you think? Do you trust them?
No. That's why I'm for this agreement, because it actually will put about 400 IAEA, and I hate acronyms, but the International Atomic Energy Agency will actually have 400 inspectors on the ground in Iran. That means they will be inside the facility at Fordo. They'll be inside the facility at Natanz. They'll be inside the plutonium facility at Arak. So we will actually have international inspectors on the ground in Iran, knowing. And right now it's sort of been a blind spot for us. We have not had good human intelligence on the ground in Iran in a long time. And part of this agreement is that Iran will allow us to put all these inspectors on the ground in Iran. We will know exactly what they have. We will know exactly what their progress has been. They had to agree, right now, they had to agree to reduce their stockpile of uranium by 98%. They're allowed to keep a very small percentage for nuclear energy purposes, but not enough to arm a weapon.
Who's doing the inspecting? I understand that the Iranians are going to do their own inspecting.
No. I met with the.
Is that a rumor?
That's the agreement is what it is, right? It's I would recommend it. It's actually 80 pages, double-sided, so 160 pages, and explains the the mechanism for monitoring the facilities. It actually, I've met with one of the senior IAEA inspectors. I asked him, I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, Ollie, I said, what do you think, where would you grade this agreement in terms of being able to prevent the Iranians from developing a nuclear weapon? He said, on a scale of 1 to 10, he said, it's not perfect, but I'd give it an 8 out of 10. So, which is probably a fair assessment from somebody whose responsibility was to actually do the inspections before they were kicked out. So, having our people on the ground there, first of all, there's a plutonium reactor at Arak that we're very troubled about. Part of this agreement says that whole operation has to be converted away from a plutonium reactor, a heavy water reactor, that could have been converted for military use. It redesigns that whole plant from a heavy water to a light water nuclear energy facility. So that's a huge undertaking. It's a huge win for us. But the proof will be in the monitoring function.
Right.
The other issue is this. We're not in there alone in these negotiations. France is in there, Britain's in there, the Germans is the P5+1, the Russians and the Chinese. The other 5 countries that are in this have all agreed to this already. They think that this is sufficient to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And they are committed to put their people on the ground as IAEA inspectors. They're saying this is the agreement that does it. They're not going to go back. They're saying they don't want to go back and restart negotiations when they think they have a plan here that works. So if we reject it in Congress and those 5 countries go forward and lift sanctions, where does that leave us?
Holding the $50 billion probably, or $150 billion or whatever it is.
Look, the trade that they're going to get from those 5 other countries will dwarf what we're holding. We don't hold any money in U.S. banks that has been, we hold property. We hold some property from individual Iranian companies, but the vast majority of the resources and the cash are being held in European banks as a result of our sanctions that we encouraged others to adopt. So
let me ask you this. What we're just talking about took place last July. I reached out to a gentleman who we've had on several times in the past bunch of years, yesterday as a matter of fact, and asked him if you had a chance to pose a question to Congressman Lynch, what would you ask? And right away, and this is from Israel, former Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, who was a very bright man, Some of the questions that he sent, and hopefully we'll be able to get through this, there's not much time left. How can any liberal-minded legislator support a nuclear deal with the Ayatollahs without investigating the proven track record of the last 36 years, which document the Ayatollahs as a lead repressive rogue regime, violating civil liberties of the majority, brainwashing the minds of Iranian youth by anti-U.S. hate education school textbooks? And I've got a whole bunch on that. How can any liberal-minded legislator fail to demand an end to such systematic practices as a precondition to negotiation and to granting any benefit from the Ayatollahs?
Well, if that's the standard, then we should have no trade with China.
Okay.
I mean, they're using prison labor, child labor.
Well, that's something that's in place. You're talking about something that.
So is Iran. So is the Ayatollah. Look, if that's the standard that we have to convert, Iran to a democracy before we can deal with them, that's a very long road. Sure, they're objectionable. That's why they've had a terrible track record. No question about it. And we still have other sanctions in place because of their support for terrorism. Mm-hmm. But this is what we're releasing, or what we're undoing in terms of sanctions, is those sanctions that were in place because of nuclear activity.
Right.
Those are the ones we're lifting. So the sanctions that we have against Melli Bank, I'm trying to think of there are a bunch of other, the central bank, Bank Markazi, which is the central bank for Iran. All of those sanctions that we put in place because of their support for terrorism remain in place. Mm-hmm. It's the ones where they've agreed to do the right thing on nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. Those are the ones that us and the P5+1, those are the ones that we've agreed to lift. So for many of the same reasons that the former ambassador has cited, those sanctions remain in place.
Okay. Will the legislators, this is interesting, will the legislators defy public opinion, which opposes the nuclear deal with the Ayatollahs 2-1? Considers the Ayatollahs a critical threat to the United States, 77%, and regards the Ayatollahs as one of the least favorable regimes in the world, 11% favorability. In other words, I think I heard on the radio the other day, was it Congressman Kennedy, said that the next election they're going to clean house with all these reps and that voted in favor of this. And that's a possibility.
Yeah, it's a possibility on every vote. But you know what? Sometimes you have to do what you think is right. And I'll tell you what. The people who are the strongest opponents of this are likely the people who have never read the agreement.
I'm sure.
So I've read the agreement. I'm very familiar with this part of the world. I know what the challenges are. And I think the best route for us to take is to enter this agreement and monitor it and make sure that the Iranians comply with it. Mm-hmm. And if they don't comply with it, then you can go to the other countries and say, they are not complying with this agreement that they signed with you and you and you, Britain, France, Russia, China. So we need to reinstitute sanctions. But to walk away from a deal that these other countries have all agreed to and say, no, we're going to let them, and by the way, there's a 30-day breakout time or a 60-day breakout time, some estimates, for Iran if they wanted today to develop a nuclear weapon. So what will we do? We've got an agreement out here that is a diplomatic agreement. We're going to throw that aside and go in militarily?
I don't know.
I mean, well...
Someone will.
Oh, yeah? Let's see it. I'll tell you what, this would make Iraq look like a cakewalk. 75 million, not 25 million, 75 million people in Iran. Mm-hmm. A very well-developed defense around these military facilities, and you're going in alone because France, Britain, Russia, China, and Germany have all signed on to this agreement.
Well,
So the United States going in by themselves?
I'm not saying the United States. I just said someone will.
Yeah, well,
But
I
anyways,
think, yeah, all right,
we got 3 minutes.
okay.
Immigration. Is somebody going to build a wall? Somebody going to stop the flow? 3 minutes. I don't know if you can do it.
Yeah,
or
well,
not.
look, if we're going to build a fence or secure the Mexican border, we should do it from a position of national security, not as a tool of immigration, although that certainly could be argued.
There's a law. Let me ask you this: there is a law in place that says if you hire illegal immigrants, you can be fined like $5,000 per head.
Right.
That's not being enforced. It was only enforced once in New Bedford a few years ago, where they came in and they grabbed all the illegals and shipped them back.
No, I think there are, if you look at it, I think President Obama has pointed out that they have apprehended and deported more people during his time in office in the presidency than George Bush did. So there's been more deportations. You may not. That was a mass. Yeah, that was a whole factory. I think they had hundreds of people involved there. That's why it made the headlines. But there are more deportations that have occurred during the Obama administration than did during the Bush administration.
How many are left?
Oh, I don't know.
Millions.
Yeah, millions. Yeah, yeah.
It's a shame we've gotten to that point.
Yeah, the problem with the immigration debate in Washington is that it becomes a shouting match between the throw them all out crowd and let them all in crowd. Oh. And anybody who varies from either one of those two positions gets lambasted. So we have no
nothing gets done.
Right. We have no, I think, rational or meaningful discussion about what the proper immigration policy should be, and that's regrettable. And I look, I hear mostly from immigrants that are trying to do it the right way, that actually contact my office and how do I do this, and I would like to apply for a visa for 6 months to come to the United States for this and that person, and then at the end of their 6 months they notify immigration and naturalization that they're leaving. And they leave.
But a lot of them don't, unfortunately.
Well, I'm talking about the ones I deal with who are trying to do it the right way.
Right.
And it's a disgrace that they're doing all of this the right way while, there are others, there are millions of others who are just flouting the law.
Congressman, I wish we had more time.
Okay.
But I want to thank you for coming on. It's really nice to have you here.
My pleasure. Good to be with you, Roy.
We'll look forward to having you again. I also want to thank my staff, Gina, Mike, David, and Jeff, for a great job.
Superb.